Okay, welcome everybody. It's a minute early, so we'll give a little opportunity for some folks who might be straggling in or just straight up punctual to arrive, and then we'll get started. Looking forward to chatting with you all about product road mapping today. We had so many great questions, by the way. Those of you who went ahead and shared your key questions as part of the registration, we've got those teed up, and want to invite anyone who's here on the call to know that at any point you can use the Q&A module here in the webinar to submit a question. My partner and collaborator, Brett Ulrich, is here with us today, and Brett's going to be doing the good, kind work of facilitating your questions as they roll in. And Brett's a long-time product expert, run a lot of engineering teams, knows a lot about product roadmaps gone good and product roadmaps gone bad. So he'll also be a great resource for answering some of those questions for you in line as well.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Can you all see my screen okay, by the way? Awesome. There's a great little chat panel down at the bottom, and if you're feeling outgoing today, I would suggest, go ahead and introduce yourself to the room. Lots of different folks coming onto this call from different places around the world. Everyone kind of trying to tackle this question about road mapping from a different perspective. And I always think these webinars are equally a great opportunity just to get to meet colleagues as well, or potential collaborators, know that there are folks sharing similar challenges as you are. And so it's as much about getting to know me as it is to getting to know each other. So go ahead and introduce yourself to the room if you feel called to do so. We'll wait sort of another minute or so. Product road mapping, hot topic. Okay, it's a little bit after 11, so we're going to kick this off. We got a lot of great content. I'm super excited to be here with you. We will be facilitating questions kind of inline throughout the presentation, and we'll also leave some time at the end to have just a more broad discussion. So if you've got questions, use the Q&A module, ping Brett. He's going to be our moderator here. He'll be queuing up questions for me, and when we get to some appropriate places, we'll take some time to hear from you all. So we're talking about road mapping today, and I want to speak about why we roadmap, right? As a product manager, as a founder, as somebody who is in charge of product success, we need to know where we are, right? That's an important part of road mapping, is understanding where we are today, understanding where we're going, and what is it that we need to do along the way in order to get there. But most importantly, you need to know, why does it matter? Right? What is the measurable value that you're planning to deliver to your customer? What is the measurable impact of your ideas or projects or initiatives to the business itself? Why do any of the work outlined on a roadmap? A good roadmap is a pole star for product teams. It keeps us connected to the longer term vision so that we don't get lost in the day-to-day. It is the strategic counterpart to backlogs and task lists, and it is the topic of today's webinar. I wanted to kick off by telling you a little bit about who I am. My name is Suzanne. I have been working for a little over a decade as a product strategist and coach, originally from Toronto, Canada, so if you hear that accent, you were right. I've been down here in LA for the last 6 years, and I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called The Development Factory. And what we do at The Development Factory is we are a full-service digital product consultancy. If you want to learn more about the Development Factory, you can head over to thedevelopmentfactory.com or get with me or Brett after this call. I've also worked for the last few years with a company called General Assembly. Some of you might know General Assembly, launched in New York, campuses all over the world. It's a new kind of school focused on tech curriculum, right? Building up new schools for new skills for individuals within the tech space. And I lead product management programs on campus here in Los Angeles, as well as on-site coaching for enterprise organizations. Some of you on the call might know me from another project that I'm involved with. And you know, it seems like I'm involved in a lot. They're all really the same thing, which is just helping you get where you want to go. But 100productmanagers.com is a free online resource for product people looking to level up in the world of product management. And we have a weekly podcast that I host where I'm talking to other great product leaders about all kinds of great ideas, including their perspectives on road mapping. So after today's call, if you're hungry for more information, I would say head over to 100productmanagers.com, check out our podcast. It's available on Android and iOS, and you can hear lots of great conversations about how other people are getting it done. Today's agenda, we are going to start by outlining the process of product road mapping. We will identify some common approaches for prioritization. I heard from a lot of you in your questions up front, questions about how do we prioritize, so we'll touch on that. We're going to take a look at something called OKRs, the OKR framework, and explain how to apply it to goal setting and team alignment. And we'll wrap up by discussing best practices and tools for documenting and sharing roadmaps. When we see these gray slides here, that's an indication that I'll be coming to the conclusion of one chapter and moving on to the next. And this will be an opportunity for me to pause and hear from some of your questions and hopefully answer them live. So if questions are coming up for you kind of within the chapter, definitely go ahead and get those out to Brett so that he can make sure that we table them for today's discussion. So product road mapping. Product road mapping is an ongoing and iterative process. I like to say it's a little bit like laundry. It's never done. It's not something that you can cross off of your to-do list. Different organizations are going to iterate on their product roadmap at different frequencies. What I mean by that is some teams will be updating and changing their roadmap every couple of weeks, right? Maybe every quarter. Certainly, if you're a startup organization that's still in the process of learning who your market is, what's going to work well, you might not be road mapping beyond 6 months into the future. If you're a large organization, an enterprise operation, you're in the world of automotive or manufacturing, where there's much longer product development cycles, it's not altogether uncommon for roadmaps to exist 5 and 7 years out into the future, although, as we'll explore a little later, that can be subject to change as well. Whatever the frequency, however adaptive the team, the contents are highly subject to change, but the process of road mapping remains relatively constant. And this is why I want to start here, because once you start to get comfortable with the steps that you need to take to put together a good roadmap, you will have those skills. And then whether you have to build a longer term roadmap or a shorter term roadmap, the steps that you take are the same. And that starts with collecting insights, right? Or collecting inputs. And those inputs are going to come from different places. They're going to come from the customers that you have or the customers that your competitors have. They're going to come from stakeholders within the organization. So that could be your C-suite of executives. That could be other opinionated folks in different departments. They're going to come from data, right? Quantitative data that you're collecting through analytics, qualitative data that you're collecting through, soft surveying and other types of user research methodologies. They're going to come from competitors and they're going to come from trends, right? Think about inputs as being kind of all of the ideas that are floating around you. at any given time. And the process of road mapping starts with identifying which ones of these should we be listening to? Once you've collected those insights, you're going to be establishing objectives, right? And the objectives, depending where you sit within your organization, might be established at the company level. They could be established departmentally. They might be established at the product specific level or even at the feature specific level. Again, organizations are all structured a little differently. And if you're not sure what I mean by establishing objectives, don't worry. We're going to get into the details of this in just a few moments. Once you've established objectives, you have to begin the process of prioritization, right? Which is a conversation always. It's a conversation about what activities are going to pay off the best, what activities are going to create the most impact, and can we agree to and align about that as an organization? And then lastly, you're going to measure the actual outcomes and use those outcomes to reinform future inputs. So this is why it's a cycle. The results of whatever you do, for better or for worse, inform the decisions that you make down the road and in the future. Product road mapping is iterative. The beginning of any good roadmap is vision. And this is tricky because you might not be the person in your organization responsible for establishing vision. You might be inheriting a vision that somebody else has already established. You might question the vision that's been articulated, or there might be no vision at all, and you've been feeling into that lack of direction without knowing what was missing, right? So the roadmap is actually a vision for the future of your product, and it has two parts: establishing the vision and then sharing the vision. Some of you listening in might have worked in organizations where there's a founder that has a really clear sense of where the organization is going, but nobody else knows what that direction is. That's an organization that has established a vision but neglected to share it. There are a number of different approaches that you can take if you do need to be the one to establish that vision. And I just want to share a couple of them with you here. We're not going to speak about these at length, but one of them is the press release format. So fun fact about the good folks over at Amazon, anytime they want to create a product, they actually have to begin with the end in mind. And how they do that is by writing a press release that outlines what is the customer problem, how the current solutions in the landscape are neglecting to solve that problem, and what this new product is going to be and do for the customer, and the impact that it's going to create. So actually, by writing that one-page futuristic press release, it really allows the organization to get behind the vision of the product. There's also the good old elevator pitch, right? Which is really just a 30-second sentence that highlights a couple key components, right? These are the customers that we're serving. These are the needs that we're addressing for those customers. This is what our product is called. This is what category it lives in. And these are the key benefits that it provides as unique from the competition. If you can create a simple sentence that picks up all of those essential beats, then you have a clear vision that people can get behind. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to account for kind of the who, what, when, where, and why. Vision boxing is a creative exercise. It's imagining putting together the product box or packaging for your future product. If you go to retail stores, you see products that are packaged. You see all of the writing that's on the box. Greatest new product, #1 tax software in America, right? What are all of the cool things that you're going to write on the packaging for your future product? Sometimes that's a fun way to get the team thinking about what this thing actually needs to be. And lastly, the magazine review, right? If you've got Photoshop, don't be embarrassed. Go ahead and put yourself on the cover of GQ and write that great headline about that revolutionary new product business that you're going to launch that's going to take the world by storm. This is very similar to the press release format. But again, just creative outlets that anchor this task of establishing and sharing vision in an accessible way, right? Which is, a core tenet for me. How do we make these ideas accessible? If the vision explains where the product is going, then themes describe how we get there. And establishing themes is a very powerful way to get entire product teams or departments operating behind a single shared mission. And for that reason, themes should generally be succinct and actionable. Succinct and actionable. I like to think of them like locker room cheers, right? This month, this quarter, this year, we're going to keep customers, exclamation point. And everybody can get excited about that prospect of keeping customers. This month, this quarter, this year, we're going to focus on better process. These are simple ideas that, of course, once unpacked, represent a lot of different types of activities. And we'll look at that. But at the theme level, we want to focus on short ideas that are actionable, that move the company forward. And a simple framework that I like and find helpful for setting themes is to think about them as being either externally focused or internally focused. And then typically rooted around, if it's external, customers, employees, or shareholders. If it's internal, sales, production, or processes. These are sort of fundamental pillars of any good operating business. And if you use these as anchors for creating actionable themes, you'll typically be in the right terrain. Of course, this is, not an absolute. It's just an idea for getting you started, especially if you're new to this world of road mapping. Yeah? Okay, so you have a vision, you have themes, you've identified those themes quarterly. That's what we're looking at right here. First quarter, better production. Second quarter, drive referrals. Third quarter, grow partnerships. Fourth quarter, finally, new features. Everyone wants to get to new features, right? So we have these themes that we've mapped to different timelines. And below that, we have a number of planned projects that have come up. Where did these come from? These are the inputs, right? The developers have said, hey, we've got, a lot of bugs. We really should dedicate some time in Q1 to working on some bug fixes. And the user experience design team says, hey, we're getting some feedback from customers that we could use some improvements to the usability of our product. So these are all the planned projects that have surfaced in the form of inputs over time. You've collected those. And now that you have themes, you can actually see that mapping those planned projects to those themes becomes an easier idea, right? It's much easier to see where these various projects belong, thematically speaking. And most importantly, you can see what's out of focus too, right? So we talk about prioritization. The exercise of mapping planned projects to identified themes inherently forces a first pass of prioritization. Now, your team can only do so much, right? Most organizations don't suffer from too few planned initiatives. I've never worked in a company that didn't have enough ideas about stuff that wanted to be done. I've never consulted for a company that was in a similar position. It's almost always the other way around. More work that we need to do than we can actually do, which means we still have to prioritize even further. And there are a couple of frameworks that you can adopt for quickly and effectively prioritizing beyond the theme mapping exercise that we just looked at. One of those is 2x2 grids, the favorite tool of product managers everywhere. It's very high tech. You draw an x-axis, you draw a y-axis, and then you establish really just kind of two primary values, right? So that could be effort versus impact. How much work is it going to be versus how much impact will it create? Obviously, the goal there is the lowest level of effort, the highest level of impact. That's going to be a high priority project. Customer goals versus business goals. This is a powerful tension, right? Should we do this to make our customers happy, or should we do this to make our investors happy or our bottom line happy? Where do we land? The 2x2 can really help bring clarity to those decisions that might not be as clear if you're just looking at projects in a list view. If 2x2 is a little too approximate for you, if you're, an engineer's mind and you like a little bit more nuance, then you might prefer a methodology known as weighted scoring. And in weighted scoring, what you're really doing is you're identifying a few key important pillars and then giving those a different weight, and then running each of those projects kind of through that weighted scoring and saying, okay, so as an example, level of effort could be a pillar, and we say we're going to weight level of effort very, very heavily, and now we're going to look at each project and give it its own specific score between 1 and 5, between 1 and 10, between 1 and 60, whatever you decide, as a way of calculating more specifically which projects will rank highest priority. Or you can go the Google Venture route and play a little game we like to call Dotmocracy. Very high tech as well. It just means give everybody a number of stickers, put all of the projects up on the wall, and invite people to walk around and vote on the projects that they think are most worthwhile. And sometimes what's used here in a Dotmocracy approach is certain key executives or key stakeholders might be given more votes and therefore have the ability to sway the vote in the direction that they feel is most appropriate. Dotmocracy, it's fun. It's like heat mapping for prioritization. Here's the point that I really want to emphasize, and this is, my fundamental philosophy on tools and frameworks. It actually matters less which tool or framework than it does that you choose one and make it known amongst the organization. So the biggest pain around prioritization comes from the perception of team members that there is no process or order to it at all. The old because I said so approach, right? And if you're battling with a C-suite that tends to take the I said so approach, introducing prioritization frameworks that they can get behind would be a way to combat that. And if you don't have a framework in place, introducing a framework is a great way to invite collaboration and participation and frankly foster good team relationships, right? So use an approach to prioritizing projects, pick one, try it, see if it works. If it doesn't, discard it, try another one. There's no right answer to this, okay? So once you've prioritized your projects for the period, do yourselves a favor and kick out the ones that you've determined are low priority. Don't keep them on the roadmap. Don't hold intention and space for them. If you've already determined that they didn't make the cut, let them go. Some people are super reckless with this. They just say, throw it out, and if it comes back, it comes back. Some people like to keep a list of the roadmap initiatives that didn't make the cut so that they can revisit them down the road. Either way is fine. Just make sure that you're not, just make sure that you let them go. That's really the truth. Okay, congratulations. We just completed our first prioritized roadmap, and we did that in about 10 minutes. Obviously, you're going to take a little longer when you do it, but this is just showcasing what I said at the outset, which is there is a process that you can follow to get to a roadmap that looks like this. One note, those projects that are a little further out into the future, plan to reprioritize them as you get closer to the time. Why? Because delays happen. Maybe not to any of you, but in my career, I've seen some delays in the world of software development because initiatives change, because new inputs are presenting all the time. So the challenge of road mapping is, on one hand, you want to have a pretty good picture for where you're going over a period of time. On the other hand, you want to be sure that you're leaving room to iterate or be flexible to incorporate or adapt for change, right? Which is a tenet of being agile. Once you have roadmap initiatives prioritized, you can start to zoom in to the present moment a little closely, right? So road mapping is about longer term vision, and roadmap initiatives, once they've been prioritized and agreed upon, can now be broken apart into details, right? Generally speaking, this is the best point in time to start making delivery timeline commitments. So roadmaps should never be used as the absolute guarantee by when things will happen. They're used to represent approximates. But once we've agreed and identified what we're going to focus on, now the product team can start to break that initiative apart, understand what it is, and flesh out the detail and estimate the level of effort based on that level of detail, which can be known at this stage. Okay. You might, along the way, create different release points. A backlog or a list of features informs roadmap planning, right? The items that show up in your icebox regularly are inputs. However, do not confuse a backlog with a true roadmap, right? Bottom-up tactics don't typically ladder up to cohesive strategies. Bottom-up tactics don't typically ladder up to cohesive strategies. You can use those as inputs, but don't steer your company from a list of tickets in Pivotal Tracker or Jira or Trello or whatever tool you're using to organize stories. I want to leave you with this term that I borrow from my friend Jason Marisman. He's a product manager over at Amazon. It's called telescoping. And what telescoping refers to is the requirement of a great product leader to always be moving fluidly between the resolutions of now, next, and later. And that's really what roadmaps help us to do, is they give us a place to regularly reconnect with the long-term vision, and we leave them alone and we can zoom into our backlog and our project management tools to get a closer look at the nearer term. Telescoping is a reminder to move between those resolutions regularly so that you don't get caught too much in planning or too much in tactical, right? We need to know where we are. We need to know where we're going. We need to know why it matters. This is why we roadmap. So I've been talking a lot about process. I think a lot of hands were flying up there. I will invite Brett to share with me some of the questions that are coming from the audience.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. So one of the questions that we have is around how a product roadmap is often changed or put on hold due to project-based businesses on short notice. So if your business says something that, if the business temperature inside the organization is moving at a very quick speed and changing very rapidly, how can you minimize disruptions with the product roadmap?
Yeah, excellent question. So this is the reality for most startups. Right? You're moving quickly, things are changing all the time, new folks are being added to the team, other folks are leaving. This is our customer, no, this is our customer, this is our product, no, this is our product. I think the best advice that I can offer is to have a roadmap that is at least mindful of the next sort of 3 or 4 weeks out in front of you, maybe even 6 weeks, and have sort of a looser version of that that's teed up for the following period. So let's say that we're sitting in January and we can agree on what we're going to focus on over the next 6 weeks. 6 weeks might sound like a lot, but in development timelines, that's like 3 sprints, right? There's not a lot of work that can effectively be shipped in such a short timeline. And so lock down that kind of minimum amount of time that you're going to commit to not changing anything, and then put things on your roadmap maybe for the next quarter with the understanding organizationally that you're going to be reviewing it as you sort of come toward that, and then lock in sort of 6-week intervals as you go.
Just one other quick question before we move to the next section. Have you noticed a more common prioritization strategy? You had mentioned a couple in the talk, or do you have a preferred prioritization strategy that you like to use?
Yes. So those of you who know me from the 100 PM podcast know that one of the favorite things that I like to do is just shine a light on the fact that most organizations aren't doing things nearly as well as the media will suggest. And I hope all of you listening in can take a big, deep sigh of relief, right? Like, there's all of these great frameworks. It all sounds so organized and awesome. And most of the time it's ad hoc at best. I really like 2x2 grids. I find that weighted scoring for me is beautiful in concept, but heavy in execution unnecessarily. I think that the power of a 2x2 grid is that you can, through a conversation, right, in a room full of the key stakeholders, key decision makers, identify what are the most important things, and then sort of put those out in front of you. And it's always so amazing to me what happens when ideas go from being in your mind to sort of mapped into a grid. And then suddenly you're like, you know what? I love that idea. When it was in my head, I was so married to it. And now that I'm seeing that it's a huge level of effort for a relatively low impact to the customer, I can afford to let go of it a little bit. So the power of making explicit the prioritization of ideas is, for me, immensely beneficial. I don't know if that answers your question. We can come back to it.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. Let's continue along, because I'm using this term impact, and it has a lot to do with this section here, which is making things measurable. So good roadmaps are framed by the outcomes you hope they will achieve, not by the act of delivery itself. I'm going to say that again. Good roadmaps are framed by the outcomes you hope they will achieve, not by the act of delivery itself. New features, new hires, new technology, those are all what we call outputs, right? That's just stuff that we did. Customer growth, revenue growth, reduced costs, those are all examples of outcomes or impact to the business. And when you're planning and prioritizing projects, a really powerful shift is this idea of thinking outcomes over outputs. It's not that outputs aren't valuable. It's not that it's nothing that you delivered a bunch of new features, or it's nothing that you hired a bunch of new people. But if you can't say why that was good, then it's not as helpful. So when planning and prioritizing projects, make sure that you've identified and defined the proposed outcomes for the project. Which of course raises the question, how will you know when the outcome has been achieved? The problem with most outcomes is very few people take the time to think in terms of outcomes over outputs. But if you do think in terms of outcomes over outputs, and you do get so far as to define them, you have another problem, which is around shared understanding. How do you define them in a measurable way? How do you make sure that everybody knows when the outcome has been achieved? For example, if the outcome of a certain project, the proposed outcome is to increase customers, then the question that comes up is, how many customers? By what date? When will we accomplish that goal? For this reason, there's an amazing framework out there. I didn't invent it, wish I had invented it, but I'm absolutely a disciple of the OKR framework. Now, OKRs is syntax. OKR is a syntax for goal setting that anchors broad, ambitious goals, which is how most of us who write goals tend to write them down, right? Get customers, keep customers, make money. Those are all broad, ambitious goals. It anchors broad, ambitious goals to specific, measurable outcomes that indicate when the goal has been achieved. Let's look at some examples. Over here on the left, I've got some broad, ambitious goals. I want to widen the appeal of my product. I want to create a best-in-class experience for our vendor partners. I want to be considered a one-stop shop for all of a customer's needs. I want to become a better product person, right? All great goals, but how do we know when we got there? Take a look at these key results. Widen the appeal of the product. Key result, increase new registrations by 10%. That could be a measurable way of determining that the objective was met. Create a best-in-class experience for vendors. Key result, 50% adoption rate for online vendor orders. The new adoption rate of vendor orders suggests that we're creating a positive experience. It's a way of knowing the objective has been met. Be a one-stop shop for all of a customer's home needs. We're going to add 500 product SKUs to our online store. We believe that 500 new SKUs would be a measurable way of determining that we have met all of our customers' home needs. Right? Become a better product manager. Attend 3 of Suzanne's product management workshops. Okay. OKR. So the really exciting thing about OKRs, and this is a little bit of an advanced concept, so if you're listening in and this is entirely new for you, I would say start by using OKRs just as a way of making project initiatives measurable, making them accountable to impact. If you're a little beyond that, if you're a leader of a department or an organization, you can embrace what I call the cascading effect of OKRs to create very, very tightly aligned teams that are all working behind a single goal and laddering up to a single goal. So here's how this works. At the very top, we have the company's objective. Our objective as a company is to be the #1 travel accommodations company. How will we know when we got there? Key results, right? Annual revenue of 100 billion, 200 million active members. Key result, 5 million listings worldwide. Watch what happens at the next level down. One of the departments below inherits the key result that's most applicable. In this case, 5 million listings worldwide becomes the objective of that department. Now they create their own key results. How will we get there? We're going to reduce our average time to list by 50%, and we're going to open a directory in South America. Awesome. Watch what happens as it cascades down even further. Next level down, next team member, next set of management inherits one of the key results above. Reduce average time to list becomes their objective. Key result, create property listing templates. In this model, what you're actually empowering people to do is participate in the strategy and participate in the outcomes without sacrificing the alignment of a cohesive strategy that flows from the top. Everybody gets to participate, but all of that participation is interconnected or tightly coupled in a way that ensures the entire organization is rowing in the same direction. Okay. Back to our roadmap that we created earlier. Here's the distinction. Before we had a prioritized roadmap, all we've added here is a key result, a prescribed outcome that provides more information to the folks looking at this document as to how we will be accountable to success along the way. Because keep in mind, we're investing company resources to get there. The roadmap isn't just a fun visual diagram, it's also a depiction of how money and resource and time is going to be spent within an organization. This is the story of how we get there, and it prescribes the outcomes. All right, before we talk about documenting and sharing, and we are moving toward the end of this presentation, so we'll have more time for questions at the end. Anything about PRs or prioritizations, Brett, I should pause and speak to?
Yeah, so one question here I think relates a little bit to what we just spoke about is what part of the product roadmap might we consider overkill or unnecessary?
Okay, I'm not sure that I understand the question. Is it centered in what level of detail is too much level of detail for a
Let me
roadmap?
reframe. Have you ever encountered a product roadmap that you were coaching somebody with or helping a company along with, and you noticed that there was something that wasn't lined up or that should have been removed from the roadmap? Do you have a specific example that maybe you've encountered?
Yeah, I mean, I think where that presents is at the part of a roadmap where the different departments start to bring their initiatives together. So I spoke earlier, and I spoke about it at a high level. Every organization is structured differently. If you're a company of 6 people or 10 people or 3 people, the process of road mapping might quite literally be, let's all go in the boardroom and figure this out. If you're a company of 10,000 people, to which you are a product manager among 12 product managers that float up to an SVP of product, who floats up to an EVP of product, there might be micro road mapping sessions that are happening variously. And I think where conflict comes is when everybody sort of puts their roadmaps together and different product teams are wanting to focus on different things. In those cases, I really think that that's a big part of the role of the product leader is to account for that kind of conflict and make sure that those teams are coming together through the process of road mapping so that we're thinking about integration before it's like, wait a minute, we just Frankensteined a bunch of different ideas into a single master roadmap. All right, let's talk a little bit about documenting and sharing or best practices and popular tools for building product roadmaps. I know everybody always wants to know, what tools should I use? Good roadmaps have a few key attributes, in my opinion. Good roadmaps are easily shareable, right? So you've heard me talk about this idea of shared understanding. This is also a principle of agile teams, right? Shared understanding empowers everybody to be operating from the same plan. So if you have a roadmap in your head, it's not easily shareable, certainly not in a scalable way. So putting it down on proverbial paper, and paper, by the way, is just fine as a tool, is a good attribute. However, paper is not easily refactored. So what do I mean by refactoring? Roadmaps are iterative and they're subject to change. And so it's possible and highly probable that you're gonna have to go back and move things, push things out longer into the timeline, add new things that weren't there previously. And for those reasons, if you have a tool or a mechanism for easily updating your roadmap, it's going to save you a lot of pain down the road. Good roadmaps provide transparency, right? They actually communicate to other stakeholders that we're very clear about where we're going, and go ahead and take a look. You don't have to get a meeting with me on the books to learn that. And good roadmaps focus on high-level timelines, which is a concept I spoke about earlier, right? You don't want to be committing with a degree of certainty at the roadmap level because there's just too little information that's typically known. Roadmaps are like brush strokes, right? A brush stroke called usability improvements is going to unpack into a world of far greater detail than we can know. What we think might take 3 months might turn out to be 6 months. Keep your timelines high level. On this topic, good roadmaps will oftentimes depict a timeline, but because it's high level, it might be more like a monthly or quarterly view. If you are running a shorter cycle, like we spoke about earlier, maybe a weekly view. Some roadmaps have no timeline at all. They use what's called relative sizing view, meaning this bar is pretty long and shows we'll be working on it for a while. And this bar is kind of short and it shows that relative to this other bar, it's not going to take as long. But it doesn't actually pin those initiatives to any specific calendar time. You can also take the Kanban approach, which is using a card or list view to depict your roadmap. And I'm going to show you an example of that in just a moment. Another ingredient of roadmaps is this idea of what's called swim lanes. Swimlanes are used to visually distinguish job sharing and responsibilities. And this is especially relevant in larger organizations where the work of getting a project delivered might actually flow across multiple different departments. With Swimlanes, again, it's how you want to structure it. There's no absolute one right way to do this. You can group your projects by teams. So you focus on the UX team, the mobile dev team, the content team. You could group your projects by department, right? So sales, operations, or product. Or you could even group Swimlanes by products themselves to show what those individual products are up to. That's especially relevant if you're a large organization like Apple that might have Apple Music, iTunes, iPad, Macs, all kinds of different products living inside a broader company roadmap. This is an example from a tool that I love to use, Product Plan. If you're not familiar with Product Plan, you can head over to productplan.com and check it out. Product Plan hits all of the marks on providing an easily shareable, easily refactorable road mapping solution. And you can see that I've thrown a few annotations in here just to kind of visually link some of these ideas. So over on the right, where it says strategic initiatives, those are themes, right? In Product Plan, you can customize all of those to correspond with the themes that you've identified. We've got Swimlanes, right? We've got the project or initiative itself, which lives inside of the swim lane. And you can also show the level of completion, which serves that transparency of saying, not only can I tell you we're working on Android support, but I can tell you that we're about 20% of the way through that initiative as of this conversation. You can see in this view, there is a timeline view. It is monthly in this instance, but in Product Plan and other tools like it, you can adjust that in the setting to be at a lower or higher frequency of timeline. Trello, which is essentially a Kanban tool, can actually serve roadmaps really well, especially if you subscribe to the no timeline view or a framework sort of known as now, next, and later. And Trello, again, can be customized the way you want, but you create a list, you put the initiatives inside of the list where they most apply. You can use labels to denote themes, products, or departments, and then inside of the card itself, you can provide some more detail about what's actually happening. A couple other tools, if you're not familiar with, you can go and check out ProdPad, RoadMonk, AHA. These are all well-received tools, well-used tools in the market, and good old Microsoft Excel and PowerPoint, right? A lot of organizations, actually more than you would believe, are still using these tools for road mapping, and it's perfectly fine, except that they do present problems with versioning, right? Because you get into that terrain of roadmap underscore May 2018 underscore V2 underscore SA notes. And then it becomes which version of the roadmap is the most current. With cloud-based tools like Trello or Product Plan, you're not going to run into those issues because the most current version of the roadmap is going to be the one that you log in and view at any given time. So just quickly before we go into our Q&A, this is the part where I tell you everything that I just told you, or the wrap up, right? What are the uses for a roadmap? One, to communicate product vision. To identify resource gaps, right? If we plan out where we're going and where we're going includes developing a mobile app, then, oh great, I guess we're gonna need to hire some mobile developers come September, let's get on that. Product roadmaps can be used to indicate feature releases or end of life deadlines, right? So when we're gonna actually roll out significant new updates. They can also be used to indicate when new market segments will be addressed, right? You can use flags or milestones to sort of show these events within a roadmap. They can be used to communicate OKRs internally, and perhaps most importantly, to provide transparency to and get buy-in from external partners strategic partners, and stakeholders. So actually that Trello roadmap that I showed you is a version of a roadmap that Trello uses and makes publicly available so that all developer partners who are integrating with Trello can actually see inside of the organization as to what's kind of coming up. So roadmaps are not just internal tools. They can also be a great way of talking to your customers, talking to your vendor and strategic partners as well. The process is pretty simple. Collect inputs. Inputs come from a variety of different places. Have a process, establish a vision, establish themes, establish projects, make those projects accountable to key results, make those key results explicit, put it in a pretty presentation, share it, and you're there. So I'll pause here. I know I've said a lot. I hope that I've had an opportunity to cover on some of the material many of you were hoping to hear on this call. But let's hear from some more questions. We've got about 10 minutes left today.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. That was wonderful. What a great foray into everything roadmaps from the perspective of somebody that has so much experience in the space. One of the questions that was just asked is, how does a good roadmap help generate or estimate the project budget? And is there a relation there?
Yeah, what a great question. So this presentation is a little deceiving, and it's deceiving because I'm sequentially taking you through the process of road mapping. But in reality, when you are building or refining your roadmap internally, it can often look like a series of conversations and meetings in order to get to the kind of final output. So the process is the same, but there's more micro conversations that are happening. And so as an example of that, one of those micro conversations that might be happening is, if I've collected some inputs and I've heard from the UX team that we really need to do an interface redesign, or at least consider doing an interface redesign, probably I should have started to have some conversations with the team around what would that look like? You know, how much effort do you think that that would entail? Do we have to redesign all screens right away? Are there a few key screens we could implement initially and then revisit it based on success? So what I guess I'm getting at is, when you're starting to build that kind of running unprioritized list of planned projects, those projects have already come or should have already come with some degree of conversation with the teams. And so when you are putting them onto a roadmap, it's not going to be absolute, it's not going to be super precise, but you have hopefully enough level of detail to reasonably estimate. I know that's a terrible term. Reasonably estimate, this is 3 months or it's 6 months. You can also borrow from the world of agile estimation and use that kind of relative sizing to get a feel for things. And if you got to put a budget around it, how you're going to budget for it is just really going to depend on, do you use outsourced partners? Is it internal? So I guess the answer to your question is yes, you want to be thinking about budget and you want to have some of that information, but getting to the absolute detail is the work itself. And so I would abandon any idea in your mind that you can have an absolute lockdown budget and an absolute lockdown timeline prior to road mapping. In fact, I would argue that if you've done that, you've spent too much time in tactics and not enough time thinking about the big picture.
The next question is, with Agile becoming really popular in other areas of businesses.
Is it? Just kidding, just kidding.
Lo and behold.
It was on the cover of HBR, so it's made it. Agile's made it.
Yeah, it's stretched beyond product teams. How can product managers start to coach sales teams, support teams on using product roadmaps? And the question is, this person is noticing that those teams not only struggle with their own roadmaps, but struggle understanding the product team's roadmap and how that works towards meeting initiatives. Do you have any strategies that you can talk about as far as training or coaching Agile in sort of a cross-functional capacity?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ideas that might be conflated in that. So let me try and separate out some of the concerns. I mean, first of all, the tension between sales, marketing, and product is a universal tension. So just know that if you're having problems aligning with your sales and marketing teams, you're in the majority, not the minority. I've heard oftentimes product managers being described as storytellers. And I think what's relevant here is to keep in mind that roadmaps are an opportunity to tell a story, and you can have fun with them. Don't be so hyper fixated on a perfect format or something that looks very official. The whole idea behind a roadmap is you're telling a story about how we're getting there. And one way that you can try to get better buy-in is one, drop technical terms, right? Keep it really, really simple and accessible. Keep in mind that sales and marketing teams, they know a lot about their domains. They don't know a lot about product, but they want to understand, right? And so it could be that you're focusing on benefits that are being created. Schedule time to meet with these teams, show them the roadmap, tell them about where you're going, and hear from them about where they're struggling or what it is that they want to know. Don't just send the document and then wonder why people didn't get it, right? Facilitate conversations. I think the part about Agile, maybe that part of the question wasn't as fleshed out for me, but I think, you know, if we distill Agile down to one fundamental idea, for me, that idea is embracing incremental progress over time and reduced waste. And so one way that you can start championing Agile within an organization isn't to, you know, roll out the Scrum handbook and start talking about all of these rituals of software delivery, but is to actually get everybody aligned behind the idea that anything in our strategy at best is an assumption until we get some reasonable proof that it's working or not working. And so having that, let's just do a smaller version, let's start small, put it out there more quickly, get feedback, and then build on that feedback is a core principle of Agile teams that can easily and should easily be adopted. When you think of this term growth marketing that a lot of people are talking about, growth marketing is exactly that. It's just Agile marketing, right? It's let's put out a bunch of experiments and see what works. Let's not overinvest in upfront planning. Let's get that sort of just right execution, ship it quickly, and let the market or the data tell us if we're right or if we're not.
Great. So kind of related to roadmaps and transparency of roadmaps and communicating with other business units, how often should stakeholders outside of the product department be checking in with the roadmap? How often should the product manager or whoever is managing the roadmap be communicating the roadmap out to external stakeholders? Is there a good cadence that you observe?
Yeah, one of the core values here at the Development Factory is we lose our balance when we go too far too fast. And on the 100 PM podcast, I ask every guest at the end of the show about hard lessons learned on the job. And this comes up a lot. Check in more frequently than less, right? So the answer to this is always going to be specific to the team that you're working with and the understanding that you have with leadership and your own role as a leader or not within the organization. But I think what I've seen happen is the more comfortable we get, the more seasoned we get, the more room our management team gives us, the more we forget that it's just a good idea to go back to home base and be like, hey, we're doing this. Is that right? Is that okay? Is that still important, right? So start by asking your direct leaders what kind of frequency they would like. And just remember that it doesn't hurt to periodically check in, and returning to your own roadmap is an important part. Like, you know, when I talked earlier about telescoping, what I see happen a lot is we build our own roadmaps and then we don't look at them. And it's like, you should be looking at your roadmap all the time. frequently moving between the Jira board and the roadmap, so that you're like, where are we today? How is that mapping against where we're going? Oh yeah, okay, good, back to work. Yep.
Well, you want to do one more? I have a great one here queued up. And
oh, it's a great one. How can I imagine? I was just like, nah, we don't have time for great questions tonight. Yeah, let's do it.
This is softball. Here you go. So, considering product teams in larger organizations or with in small organizations, the number of products and the number of different initiatives, any product manager, how many product roadmaps should they have? Should they have one and kind of put everything on one roadmap, or should they kind of create different roadmaps depending on what they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so, I always say the official product management answer for everything is it depends. And I'm going to, of course, play the it depends card here. I think the level of detail will quickly determine whether it's one roadmap or one roadmap nested inside of a master roadmap. So I had mentioned product plan earlier. One of the features that they have that I think is really great is that individual teams or departments can build their own roadmaps, and then those roadmaps can be rolled up into a master view. The master view can become quickly overwhelming, but it can be valuable to have in existence. And so we don't want, roadmaps are supposed to bring clarity, not distract us. So I guess, the answer that I would offer here is you should have a roadmap for your organization, and what your organization is going to be defined by who you are within the organization. If you're the CEO, the roadmap for your organization is most likely a master roll-up of multiple departments or teams working on a lot of different initiatives, not even just in product, but outside of product as well. If you're a director level of product and you've got a few different products or a few different product teams, then similar situation, you might have a master roadmap that is subsumed by different individual product roadmaps. The short answer is have one, right? Have one at all.
That is the shortest answer. Great.
All right, look, I'd love to talk about roadmaps all day long, and if you all still have questions that didn't get answered, we may just go ahead and do a road mapping part 2 conversation. If that's interesting to you, you can hit me up here. Suzanne@thedevelopmentfactory.com is my email. Find me on LinkedIn, find me on Twitter @Suzanne Abate, and let's keep this conversation going. Thank you so much for participating here today.